So here we have the Erica Synths graphic VCO. And let's check out a little preview of what's to come in the video. So the graphic VCO is a wavetable based oscillator from Erica Synths. On the front of the module we have controls for tuning, and it comes up on screen what note we're playing and which octave we're in, which is super handy, an effects amount, an effects control, and a morph. The effects and the morph become an X and a Y control, which you can just see underneath the knobs. They're dual function. We've got a volt per octave input, effects amount CV, and the effects amount knob becomes an attenuator, an effects CV, the effects knob becomes an attenuator, a morph CV, which it just adds to the knob value, and then two outputs. From the main menu, we can see what mode we're in. We have an A-B mode where we can select two different waveforms and then morph between them. We have a wavetable mode where we can pick wavetable banks and morph and scan through full wavetables. We also have a matrix mode where we can move around and scale what we're actually doing and use the effects control as an X control and morph as a Y control to work around a 2D space. Have internal effects, which can be frequency modulation, ring modulation, phase distortion, wave folding, wave wrapping, crushing like a downsample Bitcrush, and distortion. And we have a modulation kind of bus for these effects where we can just set the control on the pot value and the amount. We can use the input and we get like a little scope of our input so we can see what's going on from our other modulation sources. There's also a modulation oscillator, so for FM and ring mod. So where we need a modulator and a carrier, that modulation oscillator is there, and we can select its sync, its frequency, and its waveform. Have an onboard sub generator, which is tunable from being in unison right down to 2 octaves below, minus 24 semitones. We get a cent offset for the detune. So if this is tuned to 0 semitones, we can cent offset that for unison and detune like effects. We can use the mix to blend in the main output, which is output 1. So output 2 becomes a mix of the sub and the wave. And the sub itself can be a copy of the main out or other waveforms such as sine, triangle, saw, or we can actually go in and select it from any of the wave banks that we've got. We have a scope, which looks great, and something really simple that's easy to kind of miss, but there's a timer on board to tell us how long the system's been on. So in terms of performance, where people are putting their phones down and setting timers going, you could just use this and let the scope play through as you modulate it throughout your set. We've got snapshots, which will save all the effect settings, the sub settings, the wavetables, the A-B waves, anything like that. And we can go in and manage the waves, and there's a few other settings for screens, there's a quantizer, there's a ton of different stuff on there. So let's get into one last thing. There's a lot of things to get into. The A-B mode is an A-B wave design mode. Now instead of just picking a waveform, like I'm doing there on the left, we'd actually go in and edit this wave. So we can select part of a wave to draw and morph and select tools to actually draw our own waveforms. And we can also go into the spectral mode where we can go along and change the actual harmonic content of the waves by playing around with the harmonics, like you might see on an additive synth. You can also load in any of the other waves into that wave editor. It's a great tool for actually designing waveforms on the module itself. So let's get into some quick patches just to show off some sounds, and then we'll get into some patches that I'll explain and walk through and go through all the different modes. There's a lot to get through, so there's a timing index in the video description, allowing you to skip through and find certain things if you just want to listen to ring mod or FM or the sub. Use that index and skip around. It's there for your benefit. Let's get stuck in. So here we're going to take a look at the AB mode. I've got the output going into a VCA and I'm modulating the morph. Let's take out the modulation. And let's cut out my VCA modulation. We'll also lose the sequence. So this will simply morph between an A and a B waveform. And we go into the menu, AB mode, and we pick the wavetable that we want the wave to be from, then pick a wave. We can audition these. Let's say I want that one. We do the same for B. And then simply, and I'm going to go back to the scope, we modulate between them. I have an LFO. Adding in a sequence. Slow down my modulation. Let's pick some other waves. So the next mode is wavetable mode. I'm just going to leave this droning throughout. So go into mode, wavetable, and we simply select a wavetable and the morph. We'll move through it. Here's the basic waves. It's great that we get the little scope view up top. Let's put in some modulation. And check out some of the different waves. got time to go through every single wavetable and its full range of sounds, but there's a wide range. So I'll speed up my modulation. And we'll try a few more. Tune up a bit. Tune down. Ooh, that's really throaty. So you get the idea, there's a ton of wavetables in there. And just morphing through a wavetable is the bottom of the mountain of sounds that this thing can do once we start including the effects, which we'll look at later. So the next mode that we will look at is the matrix mode, and this works with the wavetables. So we're going to mode. Again, we've got the AB wave design, and we'll come back to designing your own wave shortly, wavetables and the matrix. Now within the matrix, we can edit the wavetables. So let's select a wavetable, and then in the matrix, we can close in or open up the full thing, and then use the morph to change the Y position, and use the effects to change the X position. So it becomes a two-dimensional space, and the cool thing is we can actually control the space. We can offset the waves as well, and the knobs and the CV will never go past the matrix, so it's not like we're closing in to only work within 1 volt of modulation's worth of space. The modulation is reassigned and scaled to match the matrix that you create around the wavetable. So let's plug some modulation in. First to effects. And to morph. Slow this down a bit. And it's a great way to use wider ranging voltage sources for modulation, and rather than scale and offset them, or even use the onboard attenuation on the effects inputs, you can create this matrix and be very specific about which areas of which wavetables you modulate. Let's try a different table. So here we're going to go back to the AB wave design mode and look at drawing your own waves. Now we're already in the AB mode, so we can scroll over to this pencil to edit. We can scroll around the wave and make changes. What those changes actually are, we set on the left encoder. So let's say we want a peak. We select that, and we can just draw in to the wave. Now clicking the right encoder, we can select a wider area. Click again. I'm going to select a sine. Scroll over, play around with this curve. I'm going to to select a thinner area. Let's make a square. And you see how, with plenty of encoder action, it does take a little while. We can draw and make custom waveforms. We could then morph over to the B side and do the same thing. But I'm actually going to start from another wave on the B side. Let's say... this one. Wanted to go through those tools again. We've got square, triangle, sine, ramp, saw, peak, pen and line tools, and spectral tools, and we can clear. So I've actually cleared the wave. I'm going to do a smaller there. Now going into spectral, we can actually go in and mess with the harmonics. And Ableton's operator does this, for example, and it's a great way of working and learning, well, kind of like learning additive synthesis, working with harmonics to create your waves. And it does take a little bit of time, there's quite a bit of scrolling around, but it works well for creating waves on a module. And once you've created something you like, hitting that left encoder and scrolling to the end, we can save it. And then there's all the different waves. We can also load different waves. So let's load up this waveform, and we're still in this spectral view. Now I can use the other tools, go out, create extra little shapes based on the single cycle waves that we can use in the edit. We can also do the spectral edit over any of it. Say, so at this point, I just quickly wanted to show you the settings screen because there's a lot of things we can control with this and see and do. So going into settings, we see the info, firmware, and things like that. We can control the display, things like brightness, contrast. We could invert the display if we wanted, choose whether the scope is filled in or just a simple line. We can also choose smooth or discrete morphing with the oscillator. Discrete will just step discretely between the wavetables. It won't smooth and actually morph between them. That's called glitch on some other modules. We can monitor ins and outputs. So if we want to look at what's happening at the effects amount, let's plug a signal in. It will actually work as an oscilloscope. So this is an external LFO. And we can control that scope, check it out. We can scroll through the different inputs, see what's happening. Really useful as a calibration tool or just to learn about what's going on with some of your signals if you're not sure. We can calibrate this, use the onboard tuner to do so. There's a quantizer with lots of different musical modes. and we can also clear the memory as well. So it's a really useful just sort of back end that you're probably not going to need to use once you've set this as bright and as contrasted as you like and chosen how you want the sub to look. Maybe turning quantizers on and off, you'll be in and out. But it's a nice back end for lots of different things. So we're going to look at the effects modes, and we're going to look at these a bit more in depth, and we're going to start with FM. But first, I'm in the AB mode to demonstrate these effects on sines and a more rich wave. So I have a sine on A, and a richer wave on B. Going to effects, we can scroll through the range of effects, and we're going to look at these individually. We'll start with FM, and the modulation comes from the effects setting and the effects amount and their CV ins, but we can set whether this is just something we set on a pot, which is great for something like a distortion amount or the fold amount. But the FM, we don't just kind of FM against something static. It needs a modulation oscillator, and it has one built in. We can use the actual inputs if we want and scale these and control their range. But for the FM, we're going to use the internal oscillator. So turning up the pitch a little bit, effects amount, and then the effects control, this is rate. We can hear it's like an LFO going up into audio rates. And if we go to the main scope, we can see the effect of this FM. And a nice way to work with this is to get a sequence going. And then use another sequence to control the depth of FM modulation. And the effects amount input and the effects and its CV input become attenuators for this voltage. Now I'm just going to split this pitch sequence and send that to the effects CV as well. So pitch to volt proctive and now another thing with the effects is we can control the waveform of this modulation oscillator. Usual analog style waves, sines, triangles, ramps, saws, squares. But we also get a sample and hold. Let's try some FM, just static, on the richer wave. So this is a sine modulator, it's currently a sine, morph over to the rich wave. And we'll try some FM. Remove the modulation. There's some really cool tones to be had. Let's try modulating the depth. And we'll also modulate the wavetable position. Well, that's nice when it's not quite sine, not quite the richer wave. And that's the real power of the graphic VCO, to be able to morph the waves but also have an equally powerful effects engine. So let's move over from FM. Remove our modulation. back to a deep sine. Next up is ring modulation. And again, a static voltage isn't really going to work for ring modulation. It needs a modulating oscillator. And that's where this oscillator is fantastic. So let's use one LFO to control the FM depth, the ring mod depth. And this time I'm going to use a sequence to the frequency of that. Let's try morphing. Between my two waves, and we'll modulate the ring mod depth. So again, like the FM, really powerful and can be done over the existing wavetable modulation. Next up is a distortion. And again, this over wavetables. Can sound great. Let's try it with a modulating oscillator. It's like an FM of distortion and mount. It's similar tones to the FM and ring mod. It's really nice, gritty, perfect for low pass gates and filters if you do that over already rich wavetables. Setting this back to pot, we'll check out the wave folder. So here's the sine. Again, folding wavetables. Sounds great. Let's try that with an oscillator. And again, we can start with low rates, modulating the depth of folding. But let's take this up to audio rate folding. So even just in the A-B fold mode, we've got two waves. We can morph to one wave, and fold to another. It's really powerful. Do that over a full wavetable or the matrix mode, and there's a ton of tones in there. We can use the input as a modulation as well, as I said. Going back to pot, this is a wrap, and a wave wrapper is kind of like a folder, but the tone's slightly different. So I'll leave the settings the same and show the two together. So here's wrap, here's fold. You can hear rap is brighter. That's fold. That's rap. So rap. Doing that over the wavetable, or I should say the richer wave. Let's try modulating that. We'll modulate our morphing from sine to richer wave, and we'll sequence the depth of wave wrap. Let's try a different LFO to each one. Now doing that over the oscillator, the modulating oscillator, is going to be pretty crazy, but let's try it. It's interesting before we've even turned up the rate of that modulating oscillator. Super digital, super noisy. Really cool at lower depths of modulation though. Let's get a richer starting wave. Oof. So that's the wave wrapper. Great additional effect, much richer, much harsher, much more digital than the folding. We've then got a crush. Which is like a soft downsampler really. But great for changing the way a wave sounds and the whole sound of the oscillator. You can make this whole thing sound like a low bit, cheaper, older, simpler digital oscillator, more retro, game-like sounds as well. Thinking about those Bitcrush, low-res, Atari and early games console sounds. This is a great one, as I said, for kind of changing the behaviour of how it sounds. It's a less pronounced effect, but still under the control of an LFO. And morphing your waves. Sounds very different. As you're morphing through this crushing and downsampling. Again, let's try that with the oscillator. A hugely pronounced effect. But again, some cool overtones. And the final effect is a drive. So again, we'll try this static, and this is a sine. Really nice driving these more rich wavetable single cycle waves. Let's get the morphing moving between the sine and the richer wave. And then morph the effects amount. again, even though it's a drive and a distortion, and you might think you don't want distortion, think on a kind of molecular waveform level. Distorting and clipping a moving wavetable work great, and it's another dimension to the sound if you're not using the more obvious effects like FM or ring modulation. Finally, let's try the modulation oscillator over the drive. And again, just nice modulating itself. Going up to audio rates. And then fading that distortion in. Effects are really impressive, and it definitely takes it up a gear. So let's check out the sub generator, and we can use the sub generator over any of the modes. It's available on this additional second output. So going into the sub menu, we can select its tuning or detune offset by cents, as well as semitones. We can mix in the other main output, and we can change the waveform. So here's my main output. Currently a wavetable, and here it is an octave lower on the second out. You can hear that stepping through the various waves available on the main output. Now with both of them playing at the same time, the folding and the effects, or not just folding, any of the effects, only affects the main out. So here's the main out, here's the sub, not affected by the effects, which is nice for things like FM, where you have a non-FM sub. It keeps things a bit cleaner. Now with both together, let's check out the detune. It can be the same, it can be not semitone offset, but the great thing there is then adding the cent offset, we get in unison dual oscillator style detune. Tuning to fourths is great, especially with these various wavetables and different sounds we can have. Fifths is good, as is a sixth, and so on. It can be any semitone you want, down to 2 octaves lower, -24 semitone. Now, once you go past an octave and tune up a little bit, there's some great chord tones to be had when you go an octave and a third lower. You've just got to then think of the sub as the root and the above note as the interval. It's really cool. We're going to stick to an octave for now. We can resync the oscillators because they're going to be beating against each other at various tunings by pressing the left encoder. You just hear that kind of firm up perfectly in sync. Now the mix out, so here's just the sub on its own now. I've just muted out one, in fact we'll take it out. We'll mix in some of the main out. So you can have a blendable output too, and then it saves you using an external mixer. Now the actual sub itself can be waves other than just a copy of the main output. We've got sine, triangle, saws, ramps, squares. So we want a sine, I'm going to bring up the other oscillator, output 1. that sub doesn't change. So it's great for these unison effects, sub effects, and you can mix it all on one output. Let's get into a patch where we demonstrate using a wide interval between the sub and the main output to create two separate lines. It's going to sound like two separate synth parts playing together. So here's a patch where the single graphic VCO sounds like two different lines playing. Now in the background, I have a kick and a hi-hat. Super simple. I've got some delay on the top line, which without the delay sounds like this. And the sub is just set to a square. So by not copying the wave and being 2 octaves lower, they feel quite separate. Sonically they're very different. They are both playing the same 1 volt per octave in. Here's the delay on the top line. So I've split their outputs, they're going into individual VCAs, and I have different gate rhythms triggering 2 different envelopes. And that's why they're not playing the same rhythm, and why they feel like they're linked and they're interplayed, but it feels like a bass line and a top line. Now this top line without the delay is going to morph. The effects, which is FM in this case, won't apply. So again, by being able to modulate their tones separately, again it feels like 2 different independent musical lines. Here's some delay again, kick, hi-hat. Now I'd probably filter the sub if I was going to use this in a track, so that I had more tone control over that lower square wave output as well. But just having them in different VCAs with different envelopes gives me lots to play around with. It's really fun. So let's quickly go through some features before we get into the final patch, creating this kick-bass hybrid that sounds great. I've already filmed that bit, thanks to the magic of editing. That's coming in a minute. But let's take a look at snapshots. Now snapshots are a preset or a patch or a saved state, whatever you really want to call it. Erica Sims call it a snapshot. It saves your morphing, your effects, the settings for the effects, the wavetable that's used, and all the waves. It saves the state of the module, meaning you can recall different internal patches and settings for different songs or patches or pieces, whatever you're working on. We simply scroll through, and there we are. You can see it's already moving. Some of them sound great, as you'd expect. One other thing we can do from this, that's really nice and sort of throaty and vocal, but one thing we can do in this menu is to randomize. And I love randomize functions, just hitting them until something catches your ear, and it forms a great starting point to further create something unique, and maybe present some ideas and settings that you weren't thinking of using. So that's snapshots. Once we're in there, hold the left encoder, we can resave, rename and delete. Now the scope shows us the time that this has been on, which I see so many performers just setting up their phone and setting the timer going when they start performing, knowing they've got 15, 20 minutes, an hour, whatever it is. Having it on a module, it's a great little use of space. It gives us the tuning in hertz and a note. You can obviously see the wave as well on there. So here we're using the graphic VCO to create a unique percussion sound. And in the background, have this clap and hi-hat from a Pico drums module just off screen. But getting rid of that, here's the output of the graphic VCO and just the main output. The sub isn't involved yet. So let me walk you through what's going on, and I'll pull all the cables. So first, I want to create a very typical kick drum sound, and that needs a nice tight envelope into the Vault Pro Octave for our sound. And the graphic VCO gives us a real good thump. It responds really well to this envelope. The second thing I did was to draw a more unique waveform in this A-B mode that we can see. I've actually gone in and drawn the wave myself, which we looked at earlier. Morphing over to that. It's really aggressive. Which is a little bit out of place for a kick for my personal taste, but I wanted to use another envelope to the Morph CV to get that extra click by really quickly moving over to these additional harmonics in the B waveform. Now the second thing to make this a little bit more interesting was to get the effects and a ring mod and the internal oscillator. So effects amount, effects tuning of the ring mod, I'm using a sequence into the amount CV to create some added movement. And I'm using a gate to the effects CV to play around with the rate. So with this up full, it will go from nothing, and then when the gate is high, it will reach the value at this knob. So for a bit more interest in that low end, we've got this kind of dissonant ring mod, certainly filling out the low end in my headphones really well. And we've got this extra click by morphing to a more rich waveform. Now the sub out, which is this, is tuned in unison and it's set to just be a sine. So on my mixer, I've got just a clean kick if I want it, or the main one. Here it is with the drums again. So thanks for watching this in-depth video with the Erica Synths graphic VCO. Be sure to leave any comments below. There is the timing index below if you want to skip through and check out any specific functions. It's a great sounding bit of kit with some features that I've not seen elsewhere on other modules. Hit like, subscribe, go support me on Patreon if you'd like exclusive content and early access to content. Thanks for watching.